We'll then hear from Hillel Neuer, who is the Executive Director of the UN Watch, a non-governmental organization based in Geneva, Switzerland. He is a leading commentator on UN human rights reform, appearing often on CNN and the BBC. As a former international lawyer, the U.S. District Court of New York cited Mr. Neuer for his superb work in human rights advocacy.
Mr. Chairman and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the privilege of testifying at today's hearing on a vital international issue, the universal protection of human rights. UN Watch, the NGO that I direct, is dedicated to holding the UN accountable to its own charter principles and to promoting human rights for all. UN Watch was founded by a leading advocate of the civil rights movement, the late Morris Abram, following his term as U.S. Ambassador to the UN in Geneva. We continue to be based in Geneva and actively participate in proceedings of the UN human rights apparatus that is headquartered there. The new Human Rights Council was widely hailed by proponents as, quote, the dawn of a new era. So far, however, it looks virtually the same as, and in some ways worse than, its discredited predecessor, the Human Rights Commission. Let me be clear. Modest progress is still possible. As mentioned, annual elections allow for scrutiny of candidates, enabling the defeat of a few human rights violators, as happened this year with Iran. The Council is working on a universal review mechanism meant to examine the rights records of all countries equally. If achieved, and if that process will mean more than having the Saudis fill out a questionnaire assuring the UN of its commitment to women's rights, or the Castro regime of its respect for freedom of speech, this would be an improvement. In certain areas, then, with a great deal of hard work and moral courage, one can imagine a future that is somewhat brighter. But if we look honestly at the reality so far, at the existing facts, the record speaks for itself. Despite holding 3 sessions that purported to address substantive human rights issues, the Council managed to ignore virtually all of the world's human rights violations. The situation in Darfur, perhaps today's greatest abuse of human rights, merited only a brief passing debate, with Sudan easily escaping censure. Despite urgent warnings of even worse atrocities to come, there has been not a single attempt by Council members to convene a special session for the millions of victims in Darfur. Nor am I aware of a single Council member that intends to introduce a resolution for the victims of Darfur or anywhere else at the upcoming September session. Mr. Chairman, as you rightly mentioned, instead, the Council, which is dominated by countries from the Organization of the Islamic Conference, the OIC, devoted 100% of its country-specific resolutions to special sessions, one, quote, fact-finding mission, and a, quote, high-level commission of inquiry to one single purpose, the demonization of Israel. In these one-sided and politically motivated attacks, the Council decided that Israel is the world's only human rights violator. It said not a word about Hamas and Hezbollah, not a word about their murderous attacks across international borders, not a word about the role of Iran and Syria, as was mentioned, in coordinating the axis of terror that now threatens the peace of the region and indeed the peace of the world. These resolutions encourage extremists and are counterproductive to the cause of peace and human rights. Just like at the old Commission, we have a pack of repressive regimes at the Council that shamelessly hounds Israel at every opportunity. What is disturbing, however, is that several free countries have also decided to, in Senator Moynihan's memorable words, join the jackals. UN Watch is disappointed that democratic states like India, South Africa, Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, Peru, and Uruguay all lent their support for the OIC initiatives, each of which contravenes the founding principles of the Council and, taken together, amount to an assault on its very integrity. In the report released today by UN Watch, these countries are designated as being counterproductive to the cause of human rights. The attitude of the Council has negatively influenced related entities. Last month, the UN's Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination called its own special session on the Lebanon crisis on the pretext that Israel was acting out of, quote, racist motives. Though a few members rightly objected, that the crisis was completely outside the panel's mandate, this was to no avail. All of this on the same day that Iran's President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad renewed his bloodthirsty call for the destruction of the Jewish state. Then there was the Council's Advisory Subcommission. It is prohibited by its own rules from addressing specific countries. But law and precedent went out the window in the rush to condemn Israel, and it too intervened with a one-sided statement on the situation in Lebanon. Not a word on Hezbollah's missile attacks against Israeli civilians, not a word on Israeli victims. The member from the United Kingdom warned they would be, quote, breaking the rules, but to no avail. In the end, even she joined the jackals. When I protested to one of the subcommission members, with a chuckle, he replied, "And do you think the Council will admonish us?" The Organization of the Islamic Conference and its allies, the countries that sponsor and support the demonization of Israel, are the same that sponsor and support attacks on democracy. At a time when the world is threatened by re-emergent terrorist groups acting in the name of global jihad, the OIC-controlled council further encouraged extremists by adopting a resolution against, quote, defamation of religions. This was, in fact, a thinly veiled endorsement of the fury of violence that followed the Danish newspaper cartoon controversy. For the past year, the OIC has assiduously stoked this fury by demanding and winning repeated pronouncements from the High Commissioner, independent experts, and the Council. Indeed, the very charter of the Council, the GA resolution adopted in March, is tainted by its own thinly veiled approval of the violent reactions to the cartoon controversy. It's in the preamble. These OIC-sponsored texts are meant to intimidate domestic dissidents by characterizing liberal democracy as blasphemy. Mr. Chairman, there were warnings about all of this, but the response too often was complacency. For 2 months prior to its opening, the Council held preliminary meetings in Geneva to plan its agenda. I was there. Hypocrisy was rampant, yet no country bothered to respond. Saudi Arabia, whose school books teach hatred of all non-Muslim infidels, pronounced itself on, quote, incitement of religious hatred. Syria, which held Lebanon under its jackboot for decades, urged special attention to the crimes of occupation. The Palestinian Observer, who answers to the Hamas terrorist leadership, opined about human rights. The response? Silence. This sent a message. There were many other negative signs. The Council, in its wisdom, decided to renew as one of its experts Mr. Jean Ziegler, the man who, in 1989, co-founded the Muammar Gaddafi Human Rights Prize, an award that, in 2002, he went on to win himself, together with convicted French Holocaust denier Roger Garaudy. Mr. Ziegler has abused his post as expert on the right to food, neglecting the world's hungry, to pursue a radical political agenda, regularly accusing the United States of causing all the world's misery and of committing genocide against Cuba. Last year, he compared Israel to Nazi Germany. Allow me to salute you, Mr. Chairman, and the 69 other members of Congress who wrote to the UN to protest this anti-Semitic act. The old commission was most famously and fatally discredited by its election of Libya as chair in 2003, as was mentioned. Now, as one of its first acts, the Council has appointed Gaddafi's man at the UN to be one of its experts. This, too, sent a message. Mr. Chairman, to conclude, despite unfounded claims of a new era, the goal of real reform remains elusive. Only by honestly addressing both the Council's strengths and weaknesses will the cause of reform be advanced. Complacency in the face of this serious crisis of credibility will only lead the Council down the same ignominious path of the old Commission. But if we act now with conviction and alacrity, the Council may yet meet a better fate. Thank you.
Mr. Neuer, thank you very, very much.